Could an AI ever truly be conscious? We hear all the time about just needing more data, more computing power. But what if there's a barrier that more power just can't cross? That's exactly the idea we're going to unpack today. We've all heard this one. It's an incredibly powerful metaphor. This idea, it basically takes the huge, messy mystery of consciousness and turns it into something that feels like an engineering problem, right? If the mind is just really, really complex software, then we just need to build the right machine, give it enough horsepower, and poof, a conscious mind appears. It's clean, it's simple, and it's really, really tempting to believe.
But what if that neat and tidy idea is actually a trap? A classic category mistake. See, this way of thinking makes us confuse a really useful model, a map of how thinking works, with the actual territory of consciousness itself. We start to mistake a simulation of thought for the act of thinking. And believe me, that's a distinction we absolutely have to get right.
To really get why, we've got to talk about a concept that sets a fundamental boundary for any system that's purely computational. Now, this isn't some technical problem we can just engineer our way around. It's a conceptual limit. Let's call it the syntax ceiling.
So what exactly is this syntax ceiling? Well, at its core, it's the hard line drawn between syntax and semantics. Syntax, that's all about following the rules. It's shuffling symbols around according to a very strict structure. And computers, they are absolute masters of syntax. But semantics, that's something else entirely. That's about meaning. It's about understanding what those symbols actually point to in the real world.
Let's break this down a bit more. Over on the left, you've got syntax. That's the mechanical stuff. Running code, moving symbols around perfectly. But on the right, semantics is about getting the why. It's about context, about significance. It's that aha moment you have when you're coding, when you don't just see the lines of code, but you suddenly understand what it all means for the bigger picture. A computer can run that code flawlessly, 1,000,000 times a second, but it can never, ever have that moment of insight. And here's the absolute kicker. You can't just brute force your way through the syntax ceiling. Throwing more servers, more GPUs, more power at the problem, all that does is make your syntax engine bigger and faster. It makes the simulation better, for sure, but it doesn't magically turn a rule-following process into actual, lived, subjective meaning. We're talking about a difference in kind here, not just a difference in degree. Okay, so if computation is stuck on one side of the ceiling, what's on the other? Well, this gets us to a really stark contrast between how a machine works and what it means to be a living thing. And the key difference? It all comes down to what's at stake.
So let's look at a computer, just at a basic physical level. What is really going on in there? It's just a chain of state transitions, voltages shifting across a piece of silicon, little magnetic bits flipping one way or the other. It's just physics playing out. We, the conscious people looking at it, are the ones who decide that this pattern of electricity means 1, and that one means 0. The meaning is completely imposed from the outside.
Now let's compare that to a living thing. Heck, even just a single cell. It isn't just blindly following instructions from somewhere else. It is actively, constantly engaged in this dynamic struggle to just keep going. It has everything, literally everything, at stake in its own survival. Any information it processes isn't for our benefit, it's for its own. And there's a name for this concept of a system that's constantly working to maintain itself: autopoiesis. It literally means self-creating. For a living thing, processing information isn't some separate task like opening an app. It is woven into the very fabric of its being, its metabolism, its ability to repair itself, its fight for survival. The code isn't just running on the hardware. The code is the hardware, constantly rebuilding itself from one moment to the very next. And this brings us right to the heart of the argument. This relentless drive to persist. It isn't just some random quirk of evolution. It might just be the absolute precondition for conscious life itself. Maybe, just maybe, consciousness only emerges in a system that's tangled up in a world of needs, of risks, of vulnerabilities. A system for which its own existence actually matters. This massive difference between a machine and a living organism leads us to another critical distinction, the one between intelligence and consciousness. We tend to throw these words around like they mean the same thing, but they point to two completely different realities. It's the difference between what something does and what something is. Think about it. Intelligence is all about doing. It's functional, solving a puzzle, finding a pattern, optimizing a strategy. These are all things we can break down into rules and algorithms, which is exactly why AI is so good at them. But consciousness, that's about being, It's that first-person, subjective, what-it's-like reality of experience. It's the difference between a machine that can write a technically perfect poem about grief and a person who actually feels grief. So here's the really crucial point. A machine can perfectly copy intelligent behavior. It can be an agent in every way we can measure from the outside. It can pass every test we dream up for it. But that flawless performance, it tells us absolutely nothing about whether there is an inward life, whether there's anyone home. Perfect doing is just not proof of being. All right, this brings us to our final section where we're going to pull all these threads together and see how they apply directly to the AIs we interact with every day, using one last really important metaphor. The clue is right there in the name we use, large language model. And the most important word in that whole phrase is model. I mean, what is a model? It's a representation of something else. An LLM is a breathtakingly complex statistical map of how human beings use language. It's fantastic at predicting the next word because it's seen trillions of examples. It is a map of the territory of human expression. And really, that's the bottom line. A weather simulation can model a hurricane down to the last gust of wind, but it will never, ever get wet. A financial model can represent a stock market crash, but it doesn't feel the panic. And in exactly the same way, an AI can represent experience, it can describe it, analyze it, even create beautiful art about it, but that does not make it a being that has experiences. So if you take one thing away, let it be this. An AI is the map, a mind is the territory. And it doesn't matter how detailed, how high resolution, or how eerily predictive that map becomes. It never ever turns into the land itself. The AIs we have today are the most incredible maps ever created, but they're still just maps. And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. If consciousness isn't just about clever number crunching, if it's deeply, fundamentally tied to the fragile, vulnerable, and persistent struggle of being alive, what does that tell us about the profound value of our own lives? What does it mean that our awareness isn't rooted in pure logic, but in life itself?